The first snow had started to fall on the ruined city. Broken towers reached into the sky like the bones of giants, and smoke drifted above the cold streets. The war between humans and the alien invaders had left everything in chaos. Most people had fled or died, but those who remained walked through the wreckage with fear in their hearts. Ethan moved carefully along the side of a broken wall. His breath showed in the icy air as he scanned the road for any signs of movement. Once, he had been a soldier. Now he was just another survivor carrying a small pack of food and the heavy weight of memories. He did not expect to find anyone alive here, especially not someone from the enemy's side. He turned the corner and stopped. There, huddled against the ruins of a burned-out car, was a figure. At first, he thought it was another human beggar, but then he saw her skin. It was blue, glowing faintly even in the gray light. Her long ears curved upward, and her silver hair fell loose around her shoulders. She was one of them, the enemy race that had brought destruction to Earth. But she was not standing tall or proud. She sat on the frozen ground, trembling. Her body was wrapped in nothing but scraps, torn cloth that barely covered her. Bruises marked her arms and legs. She looked like she had been abandoned. Ethan's first thought was that it might be a trap, a cruel trick by her people. Yet when her eyes lifted to meet his, he saw only pain. The girl tried to speak, but her voice broke. Her lips were pale and her body shook from the cold. She tried to curl into herself, but the snow was already gathering around her knees. She was dying, and no one cared. Ethan hesitated. His training screamed at him to stay away. She was the enemy. But something stronger pushed inside his chest. She looked too young, too broken to be a warrior. He remembered his sister who had died during the early days of the war. No one had saved her. He could not walk away this time. Slowly, he stepped closer. The girl flinched, as if expecting another strike. Ethan removed his coat. It was his only one, heavy and lined with fur inside. Without it, the cold would cut into him like knives, but he knelt in front of her and placed it over her shoulders. The alien girl froze. Her glowing eyes widened as the warmth surrounded her. She pulled the coat tight around herself, as if afraid it might be taken back. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but they did not fall. She looked at him, her lips forming silent words of confusion. Ethan spoke softly, almost like he was speaking to a child. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Her body shook again, but this time it was not from the cold. She pressed her face into the coat and breathed in deeply, clinging to it as if it were her last lifeline. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something stir inside him. It was dangerous, he knew. Helping her could cost him his life if the others found out. But in that moment, the war seemed far away. There was only a broken girl, shivering in the snow, and a man who refused to leave her behind. The night grew colder as Ethan led her away from the ruins. He kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the shadows for danger. Every sound in the broken city felt louder than it should have been. The crunch of his boots in the snow, the whisper of the wind through shattered glass, the faint cough that escaped the alien girl's lips. She clutched his coat tightly, stumbling now and then, as her bare feet touched the icy ground. Ethan slowed his pace so she could keep up. He didn't even know her name, but leaving her there hadn't been an option. Something inside him had shifted when he saw her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone abandoned, left to die. They found shelter in the shell of an old shop. The windows were broken, but the roof still held, and that was enough. Ethan guided her inside and helped her sit against the wall. He knelt in front of her, pulling a small canteen from his pack. "Drink," he said. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached out. For a moment, he thought she might refuse, but then she lifted the canteen to her lips and drank. Water spilled down her chin, but she didn't stop. Ethan gently took it back when she nearly drained the whole thing. "Slow down," he muttered. "There's more, but we need to make it last." She stared at him, her glowing eyes filled with confusion. Then she whispered something in her own tongue, a sound soft and broken. He couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. It was gratitude. Ethan sighed and leaned back against the opposite wall. He knew what he was doing was reckless. If the resistance found out he had helped one of them, they would call him a traitor. If the aliens found him with her, they would kill him without question. Yet as she curled into his coat, her small frame trembling less with each passing minute, Ethan couldn't bring himself to regret it. Silence filled the shop for a while, broken only by the wind outside. Ethan pulled a small packet of dried food from his bag and opened it. He placed half of it in front of her. "Eat," he said. Her hands shook again as she picked up the food. She sniffed it, then bit into it cautiously. The taste must have been strange to her, but she ate anyway. Hunger was stronger than caution. As she ate, Ethan studied her more closely. The bruises on her arms were dark, not from battle but from beatings. Her lips were split, her hair tangled. She had been treated like nothing, even by her own kind. That thought burned in him like fire. War was one thing, cruelty was another. Finally, she looked up at him. Her voice was hoarse, but she spoke in broken human words. "Why, help." Ethan froze. She could speak his language, at least a little. He searched for the right answer, but none of them seemed right. He could have said it was duty or pity or guilt. Instead, he spoke the truth, because no one deserves to be left like that. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment she seemed speechless. Then she lowered her gaze again, clutching the coat tighter. The night dragged on. Ethan stayed awake, listening to every sound, his hand resting on the old knife at his belt. The girl fell into a restless sleep, murmuring words in her language that he could not understand. Sometimes her body shook as if she were caught in nightmares. When dawn came, the city was quiet. Snow covered the ruins like a white blanket. Ethan knew they couldn't stay in the shop forever. If anyone found them here, it would mean death for both of them. He stood, adjusting the strap of his pack. The girl stirred, opening her eyes slowly. For the first time, there was a faint spark in them, a tiny flame of life that had not been there before. Ethan offered her his hand. "Come on. We have to move." She stared at his hand for a long moment, then placed her small blue fingers in his palm. Her grip was weak, but it was there. And with that single touch, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was the beginning of something that could change both of their destinies. The road out of the ruined district was silent, too silent. Ethan led the girl through broken alleys and abandoned streets, keeping his eyes sharp for patrols. Both human and alien scouts moved through these areas at times, hunting for survivors or deserters. He knew the risks, but every step with her beside him only made the danger heavier. The girl walked close behind, wrapped in his coat. Her bare feet left small prints in the snow, but she made almost no sound. She had the grace of her kind, even weakened and wounded. Ethan kept glancing back to make sure she didn't fall. Each time their eyes met, she lowered her gaze quickly, as if ashamed. They reached an old church at the edge of the district. Its tall windows were shattered and the doors hung broken, but the walls still stood. Ethan guided her inside. The air was cold but still, and the high ceiling gave the place a ghostly feel. They sat near the altar, where candles once burned, and Ethan dropped his pack with a heavy sigh. He studied her again. The bruises on her arms looked darker in the dim light. Her lips trembled, but not from the cold this time. Something else haunted her. Ethan wanted to ask, but he held back. He knew that forcing words would only make her retreat further. Finally, she broke the silence. "Coat. Warm," she whispered in broken human tongue. Ethan nodded. "Keep it. You need it more than I do." Her glowing eyes lifted, studying him with a strange intensity. For the first time, he noticed a flicker of strength behind the weakness. She wanted to speak more, but the words were hard for her. She pressed her, hands against the coat, pulling it closer around her shoulders. Hours passed in quiet. Ethan gave her more food, though his own stomach growled in protest. She ate slowly this time, watching him between bites, as if trying to understand him. When the last crumb was gone, she hesitated before whispering again, "Why you fight?" The question cut deep. Ethan leaned back against the wall and stared at the broken cross above the altar. He thought of the cities that had burned, of his friends who had died in the first wave, of his sister's face before the chaos. He clenched his fists. "Because they came here," he said at last. "They killed, they destroyed, I had to fight." She lowered her head. Silence stretched between them again, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan almost regretted answering, but then her voice came again, softer, almost breaking. "Not all same." He turned to her sharply. Her eyes met his, and he realized she was trying to tell him something. Not all of her people were like the soldiers who had invaded Earth. Not all had chosen this war. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her, but trust was dangerous. Still, the pain in her voice was real. He could see it in the way she trembled when she spoke, in the way her hands gripped the coat as if it was her only anchor. Before he could reply, a sound broke through the church walls. Heavy steps in the snow. Voices carried on the cold wind. Ethan's blood turned to ice. "Patrol." He jumped to his feet, motioning for her to stay quiet. Her glowing eyes widened in fear, and she pressed against the wall, wrapping the coat tighter around herself. Ethan grabbed his knife, the only weapon he had left. The voices grew louder. Human words, harsh and sharp. It was a resistance patrol. If they found him with her, there would be no mercy. Ethan crouched near the broken doorway, peering out. 3 men moved through the snow, rifles slung over their shoulders. They were scanning the ruins, talking in low tones. The girl made a small sound of fear, too soft for them to hear, but enough to twist Ethan's gut. He turned back, pressing a finger to his lips. She nodded quickly, her breath shallow. The men passed by slowly, their boots crunching on the snow. Ethan's heart pounded. He gripped his knife tighter, ready to fight if they stepped inside. But after a long moment, their voices faded and the sound of their steps drifted away into the distance. Only then did Ethan allow himself to breathe again. He turned back to the girl. She was trembling, her glowing eyes fixed on him. In that moment, Ethan understood something unspoken. She trusted him now. Her life was in his hands, and she knew it. Ethan sheathed his knife and sat beside her again. His voice was calm, but firm. "We can't stay here. If they come back, we're finished." She nodded slowly, but her gaze never left his. For the first time, he saw not only fear, but also a faint spark of hope. Snowflakes fell heavier as Ethan and the alien girl moved through the empty streets. The storm was building, the kind that swallowed whole towns in silence. Ethan kept her close, his coat still wrapped around her small frame. Each gust of wind made him shiver without it, but he forced himself forward. She needed the warmth more than he did. Her steps were slow, but she no longer stumbled like before. Something in her eyes had changed since the patrol passed. The fear was still there, but now it mixed with determination. She stayed close behind him, her glowing eyes watching every turn he made, as if trusting him completely. They reached a broken bridge. Half of it had collapsed into the frozen river below, but there was still enough stone left to cross. Ethan checked the area carefully before stepping onto it. The girl followed, clutching the coat tight against the sharp wind. "Halfway across," she whispered in her broken human tongue. "Name you?" Ethan glanced back, surprised. "Ethan," he said. She lowered her gaze, then whispered softly, "Lyra." The sound of her name struck him harder than he expected. Until now, she had been only a stranger, a wounded enemy. But giving her name made her real, human in a way that broke the walls in his mind. Lyra, the girl who should have been his enemy, but instead walked beside him in the storm. The bridge shook as the wind roared. Ethan pulled her along quickly, and they reached the other side. There, an old apartment building stood, most of its windows shattered, but it offered shelter from the snow. He led her inside. The air was musty and stale. Dust clung to the walls and broken furniture lay scattered. They found a small room on the second floor with only one door and a window looking out onto the street. It would do. Ethan lit a small fire in the corner with scraps of wood, careful to keep the smoke low. Lyra sat near the fire, her blue skin glowing faintly in the flickering light. The warmth seemed to ease her shivering, but her expression remained troubled. She pulled the coat tighter and stared into the flames. Ethan watched her silently. Every moment he stayed with her, the danger grew. But every time he thought about leaving, the image of her broken body in the snow returned to him. He couldn't do it. Not after what he had seen. After a long silence, she spoke again. "They hurt me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your people?" She nodded, her silver hair falling over her face. Not soldier. They take me, use me, then leave." Her words came slow, broken, but the meaning was clear. She had been discarded like trash by the very army that had invaded his world. Ethan's anger burned hot. He had hated her kind for the war, but now he saw the truth. They weren't all soldiers. Some were victims too, trapped in the same cycle of cruelty. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I won't let them touch you again." Lyra lifted her head. Her glowing eyes met his, shining in the firelight. For the first time there was no fear in them, only trust. The moment was broken by a sound outside. Heavy boots crunching in the snow again. Voices echoed faintly through the storm. Ethan quickly doused the fire, plunging the room into darkness. He motioned for Lyra to stay silent. She obeyed instantly, clutching the coat and pressing herself against the wall. Through the window, Ethan saw shapes moving, not resistance soldiers this time. The armor gleamed faintly in the snowstorm's light. Alien patrol. His blood froze. They were searching the buildings. Ethan gripped his knife tighter, though it would be useless against their weapons. He turned, back to Lyra. Her face was pale, her body trembling. She whispered in her tongue, a prayer perhaps, or maybe just fear. The aliens stopped near the building. One of them pointed at the entrance. Ethan's heart pounded. If they came inside, there would be no escape. He moved closer to Lyra, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Stay behind me, no matter what." Her glowing eyes locked on his, wide with fear, but also with something stronger. She nodded, her small hands gripping the coat as if it were her shield. The sound of alien boots echoed on the stairs. They were coming. Ethan positioned himself near the door, knife ready. He knew it wasn't enough, but he refused to let them take her again. For the first time since the war began, Ethan wasn't fighting for survival or revenge. He was fighting for someone else's life. And that made him stronger than he had ever been. The wooden floor creaked under the weight of armored boots. Ethan held his breath, pressing himself flat against the wall beside the door. Lyra crouched low, hidden in the shadow of a broken cabinet. Her glowing eyes dimmed as fear tightened around her heart. She knew what would happen if they found her. Chains, pain, and another long night of cruelty. Ethan's grip on his knife was steady, though he could feel the tremble in his fingers. He had fought soldiers before, but never this close. Never, in such silence. He listened as the alien voices barked commands in their harsh tongue. The sound of metal scraping against the wall made the room shudder. They were searching. The door shook. A heavy hand tested it, pushing once. Ethan's muscles tensed. If it opened, he would have only one chance. A muffled shout came from outside, another soldier calling them away. The boots paused, then turned. For a long, agonizing moment, the air hung heavy. Then slowly, the sound of footsteps faded down the stairs. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his shoulders falling against the wall. Lyra had her hands pressed against her chest, her eyes wide with relief, but it wasn't over. Through the broken window, Ethan saw the patrol regrouping in the street below. They were speaking quickly, pointing to different buildings. One of them raised a scanner, its red light sweeping over the ruins. Ethan cursed under his breath. If the scanner picked up heat, They would be discovered. He rushed back to Lyra, whispering fast, "We have to move. Now." She nodded, though her legs trembled as she stood. Ethan grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and pulled her toward the window. The snow outside whipped against the glass, but it was their only chance. He climbed, out first, lowering himself onto the ledge. Then he reached up, gripping Lyra's hands, and helped her down beside him. The storm hid their movements, but every sound felt loud in Ethan's ears. They moved across the side of the building, crouched low until they found a metal fire escape. It groaned under their weight, but it held. Carefully, they climbed down, the snow sticking to their hair and faces. When they reached the ground, Ethan pulled Lyra close and guided her into the shadows of a collapsed wall. The patrol was only meters away, their scanners sweeping across the ruins. Lyra leaned against him, her breath shallow, her glowing eyes darting between the shadows. Ethan kept his arm firm around her, shielding her with his own body. He knew they were exposed, but there was nowhere else to go. The scanner light swept closer. It passed across the broken wall, and Ethan pulled Lyra tight against him, holding her still. The red glow lingered for a moment, then moved on. One of the aliens barked something in annoyance. The snowstorm was interfering, blinding their instruments. After a few minutes, they turned away and continued down the street. Only when the last sound of their boots disappeared did Ethan let go of the breath he had been holding. His body ached from the tension, but he didn't show it. He turned to Katie, Lyra brushing snow from her hair. "You're safe," he whispered. "For now." Her glowing eyes softened. She reached up slowly, her fingers brushing against his hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke louder than words. For the first time, she wasn't just clinging to him out of fear. She was choosing to stay. They moved deeper into the ruins, away from the patrol's path. The storm grew wilder, snow blinding their vision, but Ethan pressed forward, guiding her step by step. He didn't know where they were heading, only that it had to be somewhere far from the eyes of both armies. That night, they found a basement beneath a collapsed house. The air was damp, but it was hidden from the wind. Ethan spread his blanket on the floor and gave it to Lyra. She hesitated, then shook her head, pushing it back toward him. "You cold," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'll manage. You need it more." She lowered her gaze, but her lips trembled as if she wanted to argue. Instead, she wrapped herself in the coat and lay close to the wall. Her eyes stayed open, watching him as he settled a few feet away. For the first time, she didn't look like she expected him to vanish by morning. The storm howled above them, but in the dark basement, there was a fragile peace. Lyra whispered one last word before sleep took her. "Safe." Ethan closed his eyes, his heart heavy but steady. For the first time in years, he believed it too. Morning came slowly, the storm outside still whispering through the cracks of the ruined house. Ethan opened his eyes to find Lyra curled up near the wall, his coat wrapped tightly around her thin frame. Her breathing was soft and steady. For once, she didn't look like someone broken. She looked peaceful, almost human in her sleep. Ethan pushed himself up, his body stiff from the cold floor. His stomach growled, reminding him that their food was running low. He would need to scavenge soon, but leaving her alone felt wrong. She had no one but him now. When Lyra stirred awake, she blinked at him with those glowing eyes. For the first time, she gave a small smile. It was faint, shy, but it struck him harder than any weapon. She whispered in her broken tongue, "You stay." "I'm here," Ethan said softly. They shared the little food left, and as they ate, she began to speak more, her words slow and careful. From far place, taken. Not choose war." Ethan listened, his jaw tight. So it was true. She wasn't a soldier. She had been dragged into this conflict like so many others, treated as less than nothing. His hatred for her kind began to bend, not vanish, but shift. The ones who had invaded Earth were monsters. But Lyra, she was different. Later, That day, Ethan decided they needed supplies. The basement couldn't hold them forever, and hunger was already clawing at his insides. He stood and strapped his pack across his shoulder. "I'll look for food. Stay here. Don't leave until I come back." Her eyes widened, fear rushing back like a wave. "No," she whispered. "Danger. You... gone." Ethan knelt in front of her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "I'll come back, I promise." She clutched his coat tighter, her lips trembling, but finally she nodded. Ethan slipped out into the ruins, moving carefully through the snow. The streets were empty, but silence never meant safety. He searched through the shells of buildings, prying open broken cabinets, digging through debris. Hours passed before he found a stash of canned food buried under rubble. It wasn't much, but it was enough to last them several days. As he turned back, his heart froze. Smoke rose in the distance, thin, dark trails against the gray sky. His chest tightened. The smoke came from the direction of the house. Ethan ran, his boots pounding through the snow. His breath tore at his lungs as fear drove him faster than he thought possible. When he reached the ruins, his worst fear clawed at him. The basement door was half open, smoke curling from inside. He rushed down the steps, knife in hand. The sight hit him like a hammer. 2 alien soldiers stood in the basement, their armor dark and sharp. One of them had Lyra pinned against the wall, his clawed hand gripping her arm. She struggled weakly, her glowing eyes wide with terror. Without thinking, Ethan charged. His knife slashed across the first soldier's neck joint, and the alien roared, stumbling back. The second turned, his weapon rising, but Ethan was faster. He threw himself forward, tackling the alien to the ground. The weapon clattered away as they struggled. The first soldier recovered, snarling, but Lyra acted. She grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it with all her strength. The jagged edge pierced the soldier's side, and he howled, collapsing. Ethan drove, his knife into the second soldier's chest again and again, until the body stopped moving. His arms shook, his breath ragged, but he didn't stop until silence filled the basement again. Blood stained the floor. Ethan pulled himself up, his chest heaving. Lyra had fallen to the ground, trembling, the broken wood still in her hand. She looked at him, her eyes filled with shock and fear, but also something else. Gratitude. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. She clung to him, shaking. He whispered against her hair, "You're safe. I'm here." For the first time, she wept openly, her tears soaking into his shirt. And Ethan held her tighter, knowing he could never leave her again. The basement stank of blood and smoke. Ethan knew they couldn't stay another second. The bodies on the floor would only draw more soldiers. He quickly wiped his knife clean, then turned to Lyra. She was still trembling, her hands clutching, the broken piece of wood like it was her only weapon in the world. "Come on," Ethan urged softly. "We have to move." Lyra's glowing eyes met his, wide and wet with tears, but she nodded. She pushed herself to her feet, still wrapped in his coat, her body shaking but determined. Ethan took her hand firmly, guiding her up the steps. Every creak of the wooden boards above made his muscles tense, but the street outside was silent. The storm had hidden the sounds of their fight. They slipped out into the snow, leaving the ruined house behind. Ethan kept her close, scanning every shadow. The city felt heavier now, as if the war itself pressed down on their shoulders. For hours they moved through the ruins, ducking behind collapsed walls, crawling through broken alleys. Lyra's pace was slow, but she never let go of his hand. Each time Ethan glanced back, he saw something new in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also trust. A trust he wasn't sure he deserved. When night fell, they found shelter in the husk of an old train station. The roof was half collapsed and shattered glass littered the floor, but it was hidden from patrols. Ethan set down his pack and checked their food. They had enough for a few days, but not much more. Lyra sat beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint moonlight that slipped through the broken ceiling. She pulled his coat tighter and finally whispered, "You fight for me." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "I couldn't let them take you." Her lips trembled and she lowered her gaze. No one fight before. The words hit him hard. She had been abandoned by her own people, left to die in the snow, used and broken, and yet she was still here, clinging to life. Ethan reached out, gently touching her hand. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed, her fingers curling against his. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not empty. It was a silence of understanding. Later, as they settled against the cold wall, Ethan noticed Lyra shiver again. Without a word, he sat closer, letting his body heat ease the chill. She leaned into him hesitantly, then rested her head against his shoulder. For a brief moment, the war outside seemed far away, but peace never lasted. Just before dawn, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. Ethan jolted awake, his hand instantly on his knife. He crept to the broken window and peered outside. A convoy of alien vehicles rolled through the streets, their lights cutting through the storm. Soldiers marched alongside, scanning every ruin with their devices. Ethan cursed under his breath. They weren't just patrolling anymore, they were searching. He turned back to Lyra, who had woken and was watching him with wide eyes. "We have to go now," he whispered. She pushed herself up, still unsteady, but ready. Ethan grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and guided her through a back exit of the station. They moved into the storm, the snow covering their tracks as fast as they made them. The city ahead stretched like a graveyard, silent and endless. Ethan knew they couldn't outrun the patrols forever. They needed a safe place, somewhere deep, enough to hide. As they trudged through the snow, Lyra suddenly tugged his arm. "Underground," she whispered. "Safe. There." Ethan frowned. "You know a place?" She nodded weakly. "Before, they hide me there, not far. It was risky. Following her meant trusting her completely. But trust was all they had left." Ethan squeezed her hand and gave a sharp nod. "Lead the way." Lyra's glowing eyes shone faintly in the storm as she pointed toward the shadow of the city's old metro tunnels, a place buried beneath the ruins, forgotten by both armies. Ethan pulled her closer, his coat flapping in the wind. "Then that's where we go." Together they stepped into the storm once more, two broken souls bound not by blood or duty, but by the fragile spark of survival. The metro tunnels yawned open before them, a black mouth in the snow-covered ground. The old stairs leading down were cracked and half-buried, but still passable. Ethan guided Lyra into the darkness, their steps echoing faintly off the stone walls. The storm outside faded into silence, replaced by the heavy stillness of underground air. A faint smell of rust and damp earth clung to the tunnels. Broken lights dangled from the ceiling, long dead. Graffiti lined the walls in colors that had faded with time. Ethan's boots crunched on shattered glass as he led her deeper inside. Lyra stayed close, her glowing eyes the only light in the darkness. After a while, Ethan lit a small torch from his pack. The flame flickered against the walls, pushing back the shadows. He scanned every corner, every doorway, wary of movement. The tunnels were dangerous. Bandits, deserters, even wild animals had made their homes down here, and now it might be their only chance to survive. They stopped at an abandoned platform. Rusted benches sat crooked, and a collapsed train car lay twisted across the tracks. Ethan checked the area carefully before motioning for Lyra to sit. She lowered herself slowly, exhaustion clear in her trembling body. He gave her a small can of food. She ate in silence, her glowing eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she whispered softly, "Safe?" "For now," Ethan answered. "But we can't stay too long. If they're hunting, they'll search down here too." Lyra's lips parted, but no words came. She wrapped the coat tighter around herself and leaned against the cold wall. Her gaze softened as she studied him, and after a moment she whispered again, "You care?" Ethan froze. He wasn't sure how to answer. Caring was dangerous. It made you weak in war. But as he looked at her bruised arms, her tired face, he couldn't deny it. "Yes," he said finally. "I care." Her lips trembled into the faintest smile, Then she whispered something in her own tongue, a word soft and musical. Ethan didn't know the meaning, but he felt it. It was not a word of fear. It was a word of trust. They rested there for a while. The silence of the tunnels wrapped around them, broken only by the drip of water from the ceiling. But peace was never meant to last. A sound echoed in the distance, metal clanging against stone, followed by low voices. Ethan stiffened. He quickly doused the torch, plunging them into darkness. Lyra's glowing eyes widened, but she stayed silent. The voices grew louder. Human voices. Not resistant soldiers. These were rougher, crueler, the kind of men who thrived in ruins. Bandits. Ethan motioned for Lyra to stay hidden behind the collapsed train car. She obeyed, slipping into the shadows. Ethan crouched low, gripping his knife. His heart pounded in the silence. The bandits entered the platform, 3 of them, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They laughed harshly, talking about loot and easy prey. Ethan's gut twisted. If they found Lyra, they would see her as nothing but a prize. One of the lights swept dangerously close to her hiding place. Lyra held her breath, pressing deeper, into the shadows. Ethan's grip on his knife tightened. He could feel the weight of choice pressing on him. He could fight them, risk death, or stay silent and pray they left. But then one of the bandits spotted the can of food Ethan had left on the ground. "Well, well," the man sneered. "Looks like we've got company." Ethan cursed under his breath. There was no choice now. He stepped out of the shadows, knife ready. "Leave," he growled. The 3 bandits turned, their flashlights blinding him. For a moment, silence hung. Then laughter erupted. "Look at this fool," one of them jeered. "All alone in the dark, waving a knife. What are you hiding, stranger?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew they wouldn't leave without blood. He raised his knife higher, his voice sharp. "I said go." The bandits spread out, circling him slowly. One pulled out a rusted blade, another a pipe. The third reached for something at his belt. Lyra's heart raced as she watched from the shadows. Every instinct told her to stay hidden. But as the men closed in on Ethan, something inside her snapped. She couldn't lose the only person who had ever stood for her. Ethan braced himself as the first man lunged forward, and in that split second, Lyra stepped from the shadows, her glowing eyes blazing, in the dark like fire. The bandits froze when Lyra stepped into the dim glow of their flashlights. Her blue skin shimmered faintly, and her glowing eyes cut through the darkness like fire. For a moment, the men hesitated. She looked too strange, too beautiful, too otherworldly to be real. One of them broke the silence with a cruel laugh. Well, what do we have here? He wasn't hiding food. He was hiding a prize. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He moved quickly, placing himself between Lyra and the men. "She's not yours," he growled. The leader sneered. "Then what is she? A pet? A slave? You think you can keep something like that all to yourself?" Lyra's trembling hands clutched Ethan's coat tighter around her. Fear flickered across her face, but behind it was something else. A spark. She stepped closer to Ethan, her voice soft but steady. "Together." The first bandit lunged, swinging his rusted blade. Ethan blocked with his knife, the clash echoing through the tunnel. Pain shot through his arm as the force drove him back. Another man swung the pipe, and Ethan barely ducked in time. The leader laughed, circling like a wolf. "Kill the man. Leave the girl for later." Something inside Lyra broke free. She screamed, not in fear, but in fury. The sound echoed like thunder in the tunnel. The bandits flinched, startled, and in that heartbeat her hidden strength appeared. Her hands glowed faintly, blue light sparking along her skin. She grabbed the nearest bandit by the wrist. His eyes widened in shock as a surge of energy pulsed through him. He cried out, collapsing to the ground, his weapon clattering away. Ethan's eyes widened, stunned. He had thought she was helpless, but there was power in her, raw and untamed. The second bandit swung at her with the pipe, but Ethan intercepted, driving his knife deep into the man's side. The bandit gasped, stumbled, and fell. The leader snarled, pulling a pistol from his belt. He aimed at Ethan. "Enough games!" Before Ethan could react, Lyra moved. She raised her hand, her glowing eyes blazing brighter than ever. A wave of blue light burst from her palm, striking the pistol. It flew from the leader's hand, skidding across the floor. The man stared at her in shock. What are you?" Lyra stepped forward, her body shaking but her voice clear. "Not yours. Never again." Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged, tackling the man to the ground. His knife flashed once, twice, until the struggle ended. Silence filled the platform again, broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. Lyra stood trembling, the glow fading from her hands. Her knees buckled, and she nearly fell, but Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. She clung to him, her body weak, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved me," Ethan whispered, his voice raw. She shook her head faintly. "No, we saved." Ethan looked down at her, his chest tightening. She wasn't just someone to protect anymore. She had her own strength, her own fire. He realized then that she wasn't only surviving because of him. He was surviving because of her, too. They sat in the silence for a long moment, surrounded by the bodies of their enemies. Ethan held her close, his coat still around her shoulders. For the first time, he understood the truth. She wasn't his burden. She was his partner. Lyra's trembling fingers brushed against his cheek. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak more, but exhaustion pulled her into sleep. Ethan carried her gently back behind the collapsed train car, laying her down on his blanket. As she slept, he sat beside her, knife still in hand, watching the shadows. The war still raged above them, and danger was far from over. But as he looked at Lyra, resting peacefully with her glowing skin dim in the dark, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt since before the war. Hope. The tunnels were silent the next morning. Dust drifted in the faint shafts of light that slipped through cracks in the ceiling. Ethan sat awake, his knife in hand, watching over Lyra as she slept. Her breathing was steady now, her bruises less harsh in the dim glow. She looked fragile, but also strong in a way he hadn't seen before. When she stirred, her glowing eyes met his. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra whispered softly, "You. Stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. They shared a little food, though their supply was nearly gone. Ethan knew they couldn't remain in the tunnels forever. Patrols above, bandits below. It was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't leaving her behind. Lyra sat quietly, her hands folded in his coat. Finally, she spoke again, her words broken but clear. "I fight with you." Ethan studied her. She was thin, scarred, still healing. But there was fire in her eyes. He nodded slowly. "Then we fight together." That night, the storm above cleared and faint moonlight lit the ruined city. Ethan guided Lyra back to the surface. The streets were eerily quiet, too quiet. He felt danger in every shadow. As they crossed a collapsed bridge, he saw them, an alien patrol moving toward the tunnels, scanners glowing red. Ethan cursed under his breath. They must have tracked the fight with the bandits. If the soldiers reached the tunnels, others hiding, there would be slaughtered. He looked at Lyra. Her hands trembled, but she lifted her chin, her glowing eyes fierce. "We stopped them." Ethan hesitated. It was madness to fight a patrol head-on. But when he saw her determination, he knew there was no other choice. Together, they would stand. They took position behind the broken stone, waiting. As the soldiers drew close, Ethan gripped his knife, his heart pounding. Lyra raised her hands, blue light already glowing faintly along her skin. The first soldier stepped into view. Ethan lunged, striking fast and silent. The soldier fell with a gurgling cry. Shouts erupted as the others raised their weapons. Lyra's hands blazed. A surge of energy burst forth, knocking two soldiers back. Ethan moved with her, striking swiftly, using every bit of skill left in his weary body. The fight was brutal, raw, but side by side they pushed back against the armored. At last, silence fell again. The patrol lay scattered in the snow, their weapons smoking. Ethan leaned heavily against the broken wall, his chest burning with exhaustion. Lyra dropped to her knees, her glowing hands dimming. He rushed to her side, pulling her close. "You're all right? You're all right." She looked up at him, tears shining in her glowing eyes. "Safe because of you." Ethan shook his head. "Because of us." For a long moment they simply held each other in the cold silence. The war was still raging beyond the city, armies still clashing, blood still spilling. But here, in the ruins, something new had been born. Not enemy and soldier, not captor and captive, but two souls bound by survival, trust, and something deeper than either of them had expected. Lyra pressed her forehead gently against his chest. "Coat, warm, but you, warmer." Ethan laughed softly, a sound he hadn't made in years. He wrapped his arms tighter around her, holding her as if nothing in the world could take her away again. Above them, the moonlight cut through the clouds, shining bright on the broken city, and in that light, Ethan knew the truth. The war might never end, but his fight had found a new meaning. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was protecting someone worth everything. And as long as he drew breath, Lyra would never be left broken in the snow again.